My name is Sister Claire McGowan. I'm Executive Director of New Pioneers for a Sustainable Future here in Springfield City Hall to be exact. And we're gathered tonight at the Springfield campus of the Elizabethtown Community and Technical College for a really wonderful panel, the 14th in our Moving Forward Forum series. This is our 14th forum, and we have a wonderful panel tonight. Our guests are Chris Woolery, who is the director of Just Smart Kentucky? How Smart Kentucky, which is a program of the Mountain Association of Community Economic Development in Berea. And Chris's work and the work of his agency is helping people to develop energy-efficient homes. So Chris is going to be speaking to us. I think you'll be in the third position in tonight's panel. Our next panelist is Dr. Leah Bayens, familiar to many of you from here in the Tri-County area. Leah is the director of the Berry Farming Program, which spent 4 wonderful years at St. Catherine College. And now Leah is employed at the Berry Center doing research on the program and investigating how the program will continue. And Leah is going to be speaking to us, particularly as a member of Kentuckians for the Commonwealth, about this effort that they're making for renewable energy policy. And our third speaker is Jim Porter of Danville. Jim is an economist and an activist. He worked with Square D Schneider Electric for many years as an economist, so he comes out of the energy industry background. And Jim has been very active working in Danville lately on this Kinder Morgan pipeline issue, which we're all struggling with at this point. So the topic tonight is Empowering Kentucky, a Citizen Strategy for Renewable Energy Policy. And we have the gift of 3 people who've been very involved in Kentuckians for the Commonwealth. So they bring an expertise that is really valuable to us. And they're going to be explaining to us the federal Clean Power Program and an initiative by Kentuckians for the Commonwealth to see what we could do here in Kentucky about a better, more renewable energy policy. So with that, I'd like to ask Leah if you would begin and talk to us about the Clean Power Plan and Kentucky's governmental response to it.
Sure, I'll be happy to. And I will use my notes to keep me on track with time. But as Sister Claire mentioned, I live on a family farm in Boyle County, but I had the privilege of spending the last 4 years teaching at St. Catherine College and getting to know the community here. What I love most about my home in Alum Springs and in Washington County is the land and the water. And my farm that my family lives on is about 200 acres of woods and pasture, and we have a 4-acre lake where we like to swim and fish. We have a big barn bash for Kentuckians for the Commonwealth there each year. And in a lot of ways, that farm reminds me of a kind of smaller version of Washington County with its beautiful grassland and woods and Willisburg Lake. And in fact, I see a lot of similarities between my home in Boyle County and the Tri-County area here, especially when it comes to being land-conserving communities. In both places, as throughout central Kentucky, people care about healthy land and clean water and air. In both places, I find people who are frugal and who are thankful for their blessings of rural and small-town life. And these are people who don't waste what they have, and they teach their children the responsibility of good stewardship. And throughout our region as well as our state, we have people who work hard to provide for their families now with an eye toward keeping the land and the water and the air healthy for future generations. One issue so many people, elders and middle-agers like me and young people alike, are concerned about is how to make sure that our current and future plans for energy sources reflect these values. On this note, we're here tonight to talk about a prospect that Kentuckians have to shape legislation that will help us transition to a clean energy economy, one that's good for all of our friends and family and neighbors, and which encourages all of us, residents and business owners as well as industries, to be more conservative. That is, to take a conservation-minded and frugal approach to how we generate electricity. Tonight, my friends and I will talk about how we can do this through the Empower Kentucky project. The project includes a plan written by the grassroots organization Kentuckians for the Commonwealth to help citizens have a voice in decisions about our energy future. And for those of you who are here in the crowd, this is the draft framework that Chris is going to be talking about, and I think Jim will as well. So, so this project includes, this particular plan here is a way for citizens to have a voice in decision making about our energy future. See, our energy infrastructure is changing. We face opportunities and risks alike, and it's essential for citizens to have a way to have a say in how energy sources are determined in our state. We have the chance to guide how electricity is actually produced in Kentucky, thanks in part to a new federal rule, which Sister Claire mentioned, that directs states to reduce carbon dioxide pollution from the energy sector by 2030. This is dubbed the Clean Power Plan, or the CPP, and it was unveiled in August of 2015. This is the first national effort to regulate greenhouse gases from existing power plants, which account for nearly 40% of the greenhouse gas emissions in the United States. Now, my role in this panel is to give you an overview of the Clean Power Plan and to describe what's at stake in Kentucky. But before digging into the nitty-gritty of the Clean Power Plan, it's important to understand a little bit about the current energy landscape here in Kentucky. So most of our power comes primarily from a fleet of mostly old centralized coal-fired plants. We have low electricity rates in comparison to other states, but ironically our bills here in the state of Kentucky tend to be higher because our homes and businesses use and waste a lot of electricity. So communities in Kentucky pay an average of 15% of incomes on electricity, whereas the national average is only 3% of incomes. Our low electricity costs have attracted many energy-intensive industries to the state, but even though industries only account for about 1%, actually less than 1% of the customers of utilities in Kentucky, they actually use 41% of our electricity. So almost all of that energy comes from coal, as you might imagine, here in Kentucky, 92% or so. This is very different from other parts of the country where only about 30% of power actually comes from burning coal. So in the long run, in the short run, that seems great. We've got one power source, but in the long run, having all of our energy eggs in one basket makes us really vulnerable when national trends start to change as they are now. So change comes from a variety of factors. One of the leading factors is market competition, for example, the price of natural gas. We also have things like advances in technology, public demand, public policy, new business models, and certainly the urgency of addressing global climate change. So the effects of that change that we're feeling here are mostly through things like coal plant retirement, declines in coal production and jobs, as well as rising coal energy rates. And they've nearly doubled in the last 15 years here in Kentucky. In fact, the Kentucky Energy and Environment Cabinet predicts that by 2020, just 4 years from now, only 65% of Kentucky's electricity is going to be coming from coal. Now that's down from 92%. Utility companies propose bridging these gaps with new natural gas plants, some hydroelectric, and a small amount of solar energy production. Now, the reason I highlight these things is that it's really important for us to recognize that these changes are happening now, before any new policies have been put into place to address climate change. So with or without the Clean Power Plan that we're going to be talking about tonight, or any other rules, this is already the trend. This is what's happening. And what the CPP, the Clean Power Plan, does is actually accelerate the momentum that's already begun in Kentucky and throughout the United States of transitioning to lower CO2 and clean energy in ways that protect land and people while also stimulating local economies. So, as you might imagine, a federal set of rules and regulations is pretty complicated, and the Clean Power Plan is no different. I won't begin to pretend that I understand all of the rules, so what I will do is just give you a layman's overview of the CPP to show how it works and what it means for Kentucky. First, what it does is it sets reasonable minimum standards for reducing carbon pollution from the energy sector by about 31%, and that's starting in 2022. That's the year 2022. Sounds like it's the future. It's just so close. From 2022 to 2030, reducing those emissions by about 31%. It sets individual targets for each state depending on the state's existing energy production services. So what that essentially means, as I understand it, is that states like Kentucky, which depend so heavily on carbon-intensive electricity, have more flexibility because turning our ship will take longer and be more expensive than it would be in other states which are less dependent on carbon sources. So not only does the CPP make separate targets, it also allows individual states to have more control over how they meet those standards. And with good planning, which this is what Kentuckians for the Commonwealth is trying to do, is good planning, how to incentivize renewable energy and energy efficiency while also creating meaningful and good jobs. Now, the regulations would limit the carbon output of existing power plants, but leave plan design and implementation up to state regulators. And that's at the individual state level. So states are supposed to implement their plans by focusing on 3 building blocks, and I'll just run through them here. First is increasing the efficiency of existing fossil fuel plants. 2, substituting lower carbon dioxide emitting natural gas for coal power. And the 3rd is substituting renewable sources for fossil fuel sources, so things like wind, hydroelectric, and solar. So Kentucky citizens and legislators are at a point now where they can work together so that we can work together. That's not just they, that's us. That we can work together to decide for ourselves how to meet carbon reduction standards and to develop a path to a clean energy economy. But this is a choice. We can develop a homegrown plan to invest in renewable energy, create jobs, and reduce pollution, or as a state, we can do nothing. If we do nothing, that is, if our elected officials do nothing, then the minimum standards set by the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, will go into effect, and a mandatory cap-and-trade system will start on our utilities, and Kentucky will essentially miss out on a chance to generate funds while improving efficiency, as other states will do. The EPA estimates that the reduction in pollutants will lead to net climate and health benefits of an estimated $25 to $45 billion by the year 2030. But as it turns out, Kentucky's political leaders continue to lean hard in the do-nothing direction, unfortunately. Our elected officials actually passed a law that made it hard for Kentucky to comply with the Clean Power Plan. Kentucky officials actually sued the federal government in an attempt to do away with the plan. States were slated to submit emission reduction plans to the EPA by September, 2 months ago, gosh, it's already November, by September of 2016, but in January of this year, Governor Bevin requested a 2-year extension on that plan, so delaying it. So, unfortunately, since February of this year, the U.S. Supreme Court placed a hold on that plan as it and the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals as they review that. Now, this hold, which is we expect to be a temporary hold, doesn't keep states from continuing their plans or their investments in renewable energy policies. And in fact, many of the states are carrying forward with the plan's requirements, even those that had opposed that CPP plan. So even those that had either through legal action or otherwise had opposed the plan, they're already working on it. And in fact, utility companies are already working on their components of this plan as well. But because our legislators thus far have refused to address the CPP, the citizens have stepped in to show them how it should be done. And effectively, they're taking on the work that our representatives were elected to do. So there is so much more to say about the Clean Power Plan, but that is concise an encapsulation as I can provide, and I'm hopeful that as my two friends and colleagues are able to chat about their components of this panel, that some of it will become clearer, and then also during the Q&A that we can find out more.
Thank you, Leah. That was excellent. Jim is going to share with us next about the citizen strategy for responding to the CPP, the Clean Power Plan from the federal government.
One of the things I think I was assigned to talk about was a little bit more about KFTC. I think most of you here in this room probably are pretty familiar with KFTC, but those who are watching this on cable channel may not be so much. Back in about 2006, Linda and I returned to Central Kentucky from the state of Illinois. We lived outside of Chicago, where I was corporate economist for Square D Schneider Electric. And when we moved back to Kentucky, we knew that we wanted to get involved in environmental justice and environmental causes. And we affiliated with a small environmental group over in Danville, and we were modestly active and modestly successful. But then we got the feeling that we were kind of a voice in the wilderness and just a lost ball in the high weeds almost. And so we decided to affiliate with KFTC, Kentuckians for the Commonwealth. And so we met with some like-minded folks, some of whom are right here at this table, and resulted in the formation of the Wilderness Trace chapter of KFTC in Danville. And Danville, Harrodsburg, Lancaster, those counties there. And I wanted to tell you a little bit about KFTC, a little bit of the history, because this is something that I didn't necessarily know either back when we affiliated with the organization. Back in the 1970s, a group of citizens conducted a land study in eastern Kentucky. They were looking at who actually owned the land and who paid the taxes or who didn't pay the taxes. And it turned out that most of the valuable coal properties were owned by out-of-state holding companies who paid little or no taxes to support the local governments, local schools, highways, and so on. So these citizens began to study the tax laws that exempted the coal owners both from paying taxes and allowing them to strip mine, despoil, and destroy a landowner's property without his or her permission. So in the fall and summer of 1981, a group of about 40 citizens formed something called the Kentucky Fair Tax Coalition to try and change state laws. They agreed that their best chance of achieving meaningful change was through direct action organizing, and this they did with a vengeance. In 1982, members of Kentucky Fair Tax Coalition worked to remove the property tax exemption for unmined minerals and to stop strip mining without the landowner's permission, which at that time was permitted under something called the broad form deed. 1984 and 1986, a lot of good stuff happened, such as measurement and protection of groundwater quality, restrictions on hazardous waste imported into Kentucky. And in 1987, the Kentucky Supreme Court ruled that the broad form deed was unconstitutional, and the Kentucky Fair Tax Coalition, took the name Kentuckians for the Commonwealth. KFTC, Kentucky Fair Tax Coalition, and Kentuckians for the Commonwealth, same KFTC. That's interesting. I'd never noticed that before. And then in 1988, the Kentucky Supreme Court ruled that the tax exemption for unmined minerals was unconstitutional. So KFTC has done a lot of really good things. In the 26 years since they were formed, KFTC has continued to fight for the rights of Kentucky citizens. And we haven't won them all by any means, but we keep coming back and keeping the pressure on the vested interests in the state of Kentucky. KFTC has 9,000 to 10,000 members and 13 chapters across the state. And some of the issues that we're continuing to work on include environmental development, economic justice, sustainable use of Kentucky's forests, clean water, restoration of voting rights for felons who have served their time, net metering and solar power, sustainable energy and energy efficiency. And I've got a list of some more, but I'm not going to enumerate all those because it would take too long. Now then, we've got this thing called a Clean Power Plan. And Leah just spent a whole lot of time, or a good bit of time, talking about the Clean Power Plan. And this plan was formulated to reduce carbon pollution from electrical power plants that contribute to greenhouse gases and climate change. The CPP, the Clean Power Plan, was conceived and designed by the Obama administration's EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. It was initially proposed in June of 2014. And there was a 6-month comment period during which time the public and all the stakeholders could weigh in and make their feelings, suggestions, and criticisms known. President Obama unveiled the final version of the Clean Power Plan in August of 2015. And the final version of the Clean Power Plan aims to reduce CO2 emissions from the electrical power plant generations by 32%, as she said, by the year 2032. And by the way, that's 32% down from 2005 levels. And as Leah said, each state was asked to submit a plan detailing how they propose to meet these CPP standards by September of 2016, or with an extension approval by September of 2018. And if a state has not submitted a plan by then, the EPA will impose its own plan on that state. Well, only 10 days after the EPA announced the final rule, 27 states petitioned the United States Court of Appeals for emergency stay of the Clean Power Plan. Then on February the 9th of 2016, the United States Supreme Court ordered the EPA to halt enforcement of the plan until a lower court ruled in the lawsuit against the plan. This vote was 5-4. It was split along party lines, and it was the very first time that the Supreme Court had ever stayed a regulation before a judgment by the lower court of appeals. The very first time that that had ever happened. And as I mentioned, the vote on the plan was 5-4. And 4 days after the Supreme Court ruling, Justice Antonin Scalia died. And he was on the 5 side of the 5-4 ruling. So the plan is temporarily on hold until legal challenges are resolved. But ultimately, Kentuckians will have a choice. We can come up with a homegrown plan to invest in clean energy, create new jobs, and eliminate harmful pollution, or then one option is to continue to do nothing. Our governor and our state legislature have not only declined to write such a plan, they've actually passed legislation forbidding themselves to do so. As a result, KFTC has undertaken the task of writing a plan for the state that would put us in compliance with federal standards and reduce emissions by 30% by the year 2030. This is an expensive and somewhat overwhelming task which is currently in process. And the name of this process and planning effort is Empower Kentucky. That's what you have here in front of you, is a very preliminary version of that plan. The NET, or New Energy and Transitions Committee of KFTC, has taken the lead on writing this plan. Many smart people from many organizations, too numerous to mention, but I must mention MESA, which Chris is a member of, which has taken a lead role in developing Empower Kentucky. So one of the first parts of this process were 6 listening sessions which are held across the state earlier this year. Some 750 people attended these community conversations, which were held in Bowling Green, Hindman, Covington, Lexington, Louisville, and Paducah. A lot of good ideas and input came from these sessions, and they're being incorporated into the Empower Kentucky plan. Where are we right now in writing the plan? A lot of the work has been accomplished by Lisa Abbott, who's been working night and day with Synapse Energy Economics, which is a research and consulting firm specializing in energy, economic, and environmental topics, hired by KFTC to help us navigate the intricacies of the Clean Power Plan. Synapse uses a very complex economic model constructed by National Renewable Energy Labs to try and figure out exactly what the best course of action is in complying with the Clean Power Plan. As you might suspect, reducing our carbon or CO2 pollution by 32% is no easy task. The model incorporates hundreds of inputs, including natural gas prices, renewable energy prices, known capacity additions and requirements, retirements, projected environmental retrofits, and forecasts of electricity sales. The ultimate solution will include the retirement of many coal-fired power plants, the construction of many natural gas-fired combined cycle power plants, heavy reliance on solar and wind power generation, and energy efficiency measures, which will include energy efficiency gains in both residential, commercial, and industrials. There's a possibility of a possible tax on carbon emissions. And as Leah mentioned, there's sales and purchases of pollution credits. This is a very complex task, an extraordinarily complex task, and I'm in awe and amazement that KFTC was willing to take this thing on. But somebody's got to do it. Our state government legislature has literally forbidden themselves to do it, and they're dead set against it. And that's kind of where we are right now. So, Mr. Chris, what do you think?
Thank you very much, Jim. And Chris?
Yeah, I'll jump in there. So I think the answer to your question is we didn't know what we were getting into, Jim, as you can recall. Jim and Leah have talked about how difficult this will be to do. But I just want to uplift the fact that it's also an opportunity. It's an opportunity for us to take some ownership of the energy landscape that we live in, to create systems that serve each of us as citizens rather than existing power structures. It's kind of an opportunity for us to ask some important questions, like who's going to own these new infrastructures and who's really going to benefit the most from those things. And so it certainly won't be easy, but I think this is a chance to really make some real substantive changes to the state that can really make impacts that cut across a lot of things that don't have anything to do with the environment or the electricity grid. Poverty, health, ownership. And so I also want to add to the fact that even though our legislators have kind of stuck their heads in the sand, the people that run the energy grid in Kentucky, the utility companies, they all have come out on record saying that they would like to see a state implementation plan. Nobody wants the federal government to decide how we need to run our business. So, and then finally, I think it's important to say that there's a lot of opposition to these regulations. There is a lot of rhetoric about the war on coal from the EPA. But it's clear that if you look at the history, the market forces have been ongoing before regulation. Mechanization has happened across the coal industry, resulting in a a loss of jobs even while production stays the same or increases. So there are a lot of reasons why we have these economic issues that are tied to decline of coal jobs that are directly not related to regulation. And so if we just threw away all regulation today, that would not change the energy landscape that we're operating under. Because no matter what your views on climate change or clean power plant are, the government's, the world population, the popular opinion, and market forces are taking us in a certain direction that's pretty clear and undeniable. So, I'm going to talk about what's actually in those packets that you have, the draft framework. I want to talk, before I talk about what is in the plan and how we can comply, I want to talk about some of the things that we learned on the path. You know, we engaged 750 folks directly, hundreds of other folks indirectly. Over 1,000 people have contributed their thoughts and opinions to this. And what we saw was real enthusiasm, which kind of blew my mind that people would care about this wonky energy policy stuff that I'm such a geek about. And I was really amazed by the power of the ask. You know, if you ask people what they want in their communities, surprise, they're actually going to tell you, and they're going to expect you to listen. And I think the state government has found that to their, much to their dismay in the SOAR process, the Shaping Our Appalachian Region. I don't think they expected 1,500 people to show up at that meeting. And so the power of the ask is really important. And we found that these 1,000 plus people really focused in on education as a huge part of this, which I wouldn't have expected. And finally, we found out that this was really hard to do. I have a really newfound respect, even for folks that I disagree with heavily, like utility regulators and investor-owned utility operators. They have to deal with all these things that we've been trying to juggle now for over a year, and it's really hard. So we came up with a plan that we thought would just be awesome, and we found out that it wouldn't really lower pollution in Kentucky because the market has already reared past these regulations in terms of natural gas being so cheap and plants being created. So it could be that we could comply with the CPP and still have just as much pollution as we have now. And so that's why we might have to look at a price on carbon, a carbon tax. So I'll run through the points because I know that we're running short on time. But the plan is to build a bright energy future that works for all of us Kentuckians. And we have 7 ways that we would like to do that. And I'm going to run through them quickly and give an example of each. The first is, let's accelerate the deployment of energy efficiency and renewable energy across our economy. That's where the jobs are, and that's where the economic development potential is. An example of that is the program that I work in called HouseSmart Kentucky, which we finance energy efficiency retrofits on your electric bill and pay for them out of the savings that they create. It literally pays for itself. It's a no-brainer. Another example would be the Berea Municipal Solar Farm, in which folks can lease panels voluntarily. The second platform or action is to support local community-based solutions. And so let's get together on a local level and figure things out for ourselves and hopefully get some ownership and some benefits from those things. An example of that would be a program very similar to our program, HouseSmart Kentucky, that's called Benham Saves. We created a program specifically for the town of Benham in Harlan County that had some real unique demographic issues that we couldn't just take our program and plop it down in Benham, but they created themselves a program that was designed to meet the specific needs of their community. It's still on bill financing, but it's grant-based instead of loan-based. And so the third point is to prioritize health and equity. And, you know, some examples of that would be we are working on mapping of pollution and certain demographics across the state. We're seeing where poverty and pollution intersect. We're seeing where health impacts and pollutions intersect. And so our targeted power plant closings in this draft framework are going to reflect the places that have the most impacts from the burning of coal. And so we could really target the impacts to the communities that are impacted the most. The next one is to support a just transition. Again, we're in a transition energy-wise that's going to happen whether we're on board or not. Do we want to get in the car or do we want to get run over by that car? Some examples of a just transition are ways to move from fossil fuel-based energy to clean energy that minimize the impacts on the communities that right now mine coal and the communities right now that work in coal-fired power plants and the communities that are impacted by the pollution of such. We need to do a transition in a way that minimizes the harm to those frontline communities. An example of those just transition opportunities would be abandoned mine lands funds, where the federal government will help to reclaim mine lands and create economic development at the same time. And specifically, the power program grants that are coming to Kentucky right now through the Appalachian Regional Commission. And then the next point is to fully and fairly invest in our energy transition. And this one is the tough one. This is where we're trying to figure out how to create funds from our version of the state implementation plan. And that's where we might say we need to put a modest price on carbon and direct the proceeds from that tax on carbon to the folks that are impacted by those new prices. So we could redirect that money. It can be revenue neutral and it can go toward the people that are harmed the most by it. But when you start to put a price on carbon, then you start to impact behavior. And that's important. We have to find a way to minimize pollution here in Kentucky and not let clean energy and green jobs go elsewhere while we find different ways to comply. The next point is to meet our responsibilities. And that means we need to create our own state implementation plan, maximize benefits to Kentuckians rather than take the cookie cutter federal implementation plan that would maximize benefits to other states. And then finally, and this is the most important thing to me, let's engage everyone in the state to transform our economy, democracy, and essential systems. And a great example of that would be this meeting right here that we're engaged in today. So, the next thing, now that we have this, we have to tweak it. We have to figure out how to maximize those benefits and minimize the extra costs. We're figuring that out now, and we'll see the results once we get to there. But after we get there, we're going to figure out what can we do with the plan. And we know that the politics of energy in Kentucky are pretty tough. There's a program called PACE that's been passed all across the country, Property Assessed Clean Energy. We could not pass it in Kentucky till we changed the name and took the words clean energy out of it. And then it got passed as EPAD, Energy Property Assessed District. So the politics are tough. But this plan can serve as a foundation for the next 2 to 5, even 10 years of organizing. And that's what you all do, that's what KFTC does. This gives us something to be for. We've been against a lot of things for a long time. This gives us something to be for, something that can give us really real impacts that will help people that need it the most. Then we can work for policy change. We know that's a long-term effort, but we have a reference to go back to. And I would encourage you all to go meet your legislatures and lobby for this type of change. It is very empowering, and I was amazed when I went that I was able to sign up 3 new co-sponsors for the Clean Energy Opportunity Act by just spending the day in Frankfort. So I was amazed to hear that they cared about what I had to say and my voice was heard. Another thing we can and will do is partner with communities to help make good things happen locally. So if you have a project in your community that you think would be a good idea, Kentuckians for the Commonwealth will help partner with you and figure out how to make that happen. That could look like a campaign for electric buses in Lexington, which is kind of on the books. We could pay for that with on-bill financing. It would literally be cheaper than what they're doing now, and it would pay for itself. It could be a push to get more rural electric cooperatives to offer efficiency programs like HouseSmart. And that's also happening now in Warren and the Bowling Green area. And then finally, we're going to partner with groups across the country. We have a lot of allied organizations in the environmental justice conversation to try to figure out how to continue to push for strong federal policies to support the just transition that's happening now, meaningful climate action in Kentucky and other frontline communities. So we're talking about the Climate Justice Alliance and the Global Grassroots Justice Alliance, the Sierra Club, and many other organizations that will help inform this conversation. And so the next point I want to make very quickly is to ask you all to get involved. And there's a separate handout with your draft framework that talks about some of the ways that you can do that. The Empower Kentucky website is going to transition soon. So if you have some comments that you'd like to submit, you can submit them directly to the person that helped put this all together, Lisa Abbott, at lisa@kftc.org, and it's on your handout. And then I just want to encourage you again to talk to decision makers, local municipal electric companies, rural electric co-ops, even investor-owned utilities like Kentucky Utilities and LGE. I told y'all how hard it was to get to where we want to go. They need to hear from us to give them encouragement that they will need, because doing these things is politically difficult in Kentucky. And then I'd like to thank you all for listening to me for 10 or more minutes. I'm going to turn it back over to Claire.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chris. I'm just sitting here thinking how wonderful it is that we have such smart, strong, committed, and creative Kentuckians who have the backbone and the wherewithal to say, all right, our government is not willing to take on this challenge, we'll do it. And as you said, it gives us all a chance to be for something. And very often our energy is in what we're against, as we learned with the pipeline, the Bluegrass Pipeline fight, and now the Kinder Morgan fight. It's about being against things. But it's really very encouraging to think that there's something here that we can be for and work toward. So we'd like to open up the conversation now for the next 15 minutes among the panelists to share, your responses to anything you heard from each other. One of the things that struck me, several of you mentioned natural gas, and sometimes people think that natural gas is a clean energy source. So I don't know if you might want to address that question of why natural gas and what does that mean for our energy future? But that's just a starting point, whatever you all want to talk about among each other.
Y'all want to take that?
Well, natural gas is cleaner than coal, there's no doubt about that. But it's methane, it's a greenhouse gas, and a lot of it leaks into the atmosphere from wells, wellheads, feeder lines, all kinds of different places where the natural gas can leak into the atmosphere. And not all of these are being totally accounted for. So natural gas is not a panacea, but I see it as being a bridge from coal to sustainable energy.
I would agree with that, and I would like to add that it is one of those balls that we had to juggle that we didn't really love that particular ball, but we kept putting it up in the air. That's what the economy is already doing. It would be very difficult to go against that. And we have to balance health and environmental impacts with the costs that the compliance of this plan will generate. And so that's been the toughest part of it. And we don't know of any way to do that without using natural gas, at least in the short term. I've heard many folks say it's a false solution, but I think it can be a bridge. And there's a group called Rocky Mountain Institute in Colorado that's made a plan for the entire country to do just that, to transfer completely off of fossil fuels with just a minimum of natural gas to get us there. And it's doable. And I think trying to fight against natural gas would have been too politically difficult in this plan.
And I second all the things that you all said, and I would just say too that that I think that it's important that there's potential for plans like this to make renewable energy sources increasingly affordable because of the ways in which they're incentivized, the ways in which the infrastructures begin to become developed to make them more feasible options. And I think that for communities like ours that have had so much controversy and angst and worry over the impending threat of pipelines carrying very dangerous substances through our land, through our communities, past our schools, past our churches, through our farms. This is incredibly important for us to think about using how to, if we're very practical in recognizing that natural gas is a part of the menu of energy sources, that we figure out how to reduce our dependence on those non-renewable resources, because the more we rely on sources like natural gas, the more that we're going to be facing the pressure to have pipelines running through our communities carrying not only the natural gas, but also the natural gas liquids, which we know are so incredibly toxic and caustic. And the reason I say that also is to recognize that, we hear about the fracking fields in other states like Ohio, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Texas, and in a way we feel like in Kentucky we're rather insulated from that, but boy, we are not. There's a lot of interest in some of the shale plays in the eastern part of the state in particular, that could bring that very much straight home. So the increased demand for natural gas as an energy source creates a kind of cascade, or like a domino effect, that brings it home to us not only through an incredibly contentious and dangerous form of extraction method, but also which then increases our risks and the dangers that we face through the transportation of that energy source and its byproducts.
And the concern is, if we continue to build the infrastructure for natural gas through fracking, then so many billions of dollars have been invested by the energy companies that they're never going to want to get off of it. They have to get their investment money back. So the less fracking, the better, and therefore the less natural gas use, the better, it seems. So what other points would you all like to discuss among yourselves?
There's an article that I call your attention to, those of you who are on REC co-ops. Kentucky Living just came out a few days ago. Solar power gains traction. There's a big article about a proposal to put in a very large solar farm over in Winchester, right off of Interstate 64. Which is currently in the approval process, but we're hoping to see this come to fruition. And as of right now, we have a fairly large solar farm over at the E.W. Brown power plant that's now in operation. I think it generates enough electricity to power something like 1,500 homes. So the utilities have seen the light in sustainable energy, and they are not our enemy. They, in many ways, we find allies there. So that'll be part of the equation going forward. Solar power, wind farms. Not all of them will be in Kentucky. One thing we found out in this Synapse model is that the whole country is interconnected. And we buy power from other places, and they buy power from us. And in many cases, it's turning out that it's cheaper for us to generate power than it is for them to do it in other places. So conceivably, as Chris said, we could wind up complying with the Clean Power Plan regulations, but still be polluting just about as much as we did before, which seems like a very strange thing, but there are a lot of strange things in this model.
Yeah, I want to say that the solar farm that East Kentucky Power Cooperative is now trying to get approved came directly out of a conversation that started as an adversarial one. So the Sierra Club, Kentuckians for the Commonwealth, and others sued East Kentucky Power Cooperative to stop the building of a coal-fired power plant called the Smith Plant in Clark County. In the settlement for that action, they agreed to have a collaborative process, a demand-side management collaborative, that David Cruz explicitly stated at the Governor's Conference on Energy and Environment last month, directly led to the implementation of the solar farm. So it's just another great example of how getting into the conversation and making your voices heard can lead to some good policy over time. They did a study, again, that came out of that collaboration that their EKPC serves 500,000 members across eastern Kentucky. 35% of those 500,000 members in eastern Kentucky self-identified as environmentalists. And so they had to take note of the fact that over a third of us are actively wanting to change what we're doing, and they are owned by those members, so they have to respond.
Okay. Sorry. I've got a question.
Can we let the panel finish first, and then in about 5 more minutes, we're going to open it up to everybody. Right?
One of the things that I wanted to say is that in terms of the ways that Kentuckians for the Commonwealth engaged with members of KFTC, we were 10,000 strong, but also with the friends and family and neighbors of those members, was to not only have the the listening sessions, a place at the table. There were online surveys. You can complete an online survey right now, actually, on the Empower Kentucky website. But also, recently, a few weeks ago, KFTC organized a summit, and it was held in downtown Louisville. It was at the African American Center in Louisville, and it was a series of workshops and panel sessions and speakers explaining some of the finer points of the Empower Kentucky draft framework proposal, as well as talking enthusiastically about some of the ways in which other communities are already doing some really, really incredible, innovative things. For instance, in rural cooperatives, as you mentioned with the East Kentucky Cooperative. And at this summit, one of the things that I really took away is that Kentucky isn't alone in this work. In fact, one of the ways that KFTC was able to build this plan was through conversations with other people in other states and other communities who had already started working on some really innovative ideas. And I was really invigorated and enlivened by that. And I was also really, I don't know what the right word is exactly. I was a little bummed out thinking about the prospect of Kentucky losing out in this opportunity that we have. If we don't embrace this as a time to really figure out what can we do to own this, what can we do, like literally to own it in some ways, in some communities. But how can if we miss out on the chance to really make some decisions about what we want our energy sources to look like, that would be a downright shame. And so I was very glad to also have that. Those examples, those models to be able to reflect on, to say, these are things that we could do. These are, in some cases, with or without a clean, with or without the CPP, we could do them. But this is an opportunity to do it at a much broader level and a much broader scale than we would be on our own without this.
And what's the deadline by which we have to, if we want to submit a Commonwealth plan?
Well, since there's a stay or a hold on the legislation right now, that's indefinite, but originally it was supposed to be by 2018. Was it
2 more years.
September? So like September of 2018. And then the plans that each state submits had to go into effect at least by 2022.
Okay.
2022.
Many states are having a much easier time complying than Kentucky is. I think you can see that if you generate 92 or 93% of your electricity from coal, it's going to be very, very difficult to get off of coal. Other states are already, in the vanguard of sustainable solar and wind, and also using a lot of natural gas. Mm-hmm. So it's there's no question that it's a tougher job for us. Mm-hmm. It's a harder lift.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to give some examples of the opportunities that Leah mentioned. In North Carolina, they have a renewable and efficiency portfolio standard that says to the utility companies, this small amount of your energy portfolio needs to be created from efficiency, and this small amount of your portfolio needs to be created by renewables. And they're very modest goals. Those goals led directly to billions of dollars of investments in the region and thousands of new jobs. The solar industry is growing at 10% a year, one of the few industries in America that's seeing that type of growth rate. If we don't create similar standards for ourselves and we just wait until economics are right, what we'll have is no infrastructure for that type of development. And so when it becomes economically feasible for me to put solar on my house instead of buying coal-fired power, we won't have the contractors in place to create those systems. So we need to start small and build now so that we can have renewable energy contractors that are homegrown, that can do the work. And then I don't necessarily worry all the time about, are we going to go green? I think the economics will force that. I think enlightened self-interest will force that. But I don't want investor-owned utilities to own the transition to green. I want us to own it. And so I want us to benefit from it. And we can turn those power dynamics upside down here in the state if we take away some of that power from those fossil fuel interests. The financial industry and the fossil fuel industry, even though we have friends and family members in that industry, they have too much power over us individually.
Our friends and family in that industry aren't the ones with power.
True. True. That's very true.
At least not mine.
That's a fact.
Community solar is a very interesting way to go, and we see an example of that now down in Berea with a solar farm that Bereans who choose to can invest in and own a share in the farm. So instead of having the panels on top of your house, you have a solar farm and everybody has a share in that. And I think that's a very interesting approach.
This is wonderful, wonderful thought processes. So let's open it up for everybody else to get into the conversation. Bob?
Bob?
Okay. Well, I just a matter of curiosity, y'all kind of hit around and so forth about a lot of people or miners, especially in Appalachia, where all the coal and all mines are being, put out of jobs. What have we imported or homegrown or whatever to replace those jobs with?
He mentioned North Carolina. In the sustainable energy industry there, it's created 20 to 30,000 jobs.
Okay, in that, I'm talking about.
But what has already happened?
Yeah, that happened. Now, where those jobs were, was that in the coal area or was that elsewhere in the state? I'm thinking about right now, because these particular people being kicked out of their butts. I mean, we have to hit those communities, I think, with other opportunities to replace those. And if we make it a local election, then it's not going to help the calculation directly.
Now, I'll give an example. Mesa is working right now on a grant that we just got from the Appalachian Regional Commission, $2.1 million of what's called I don't know
There's too
what the
many
acronym is, but it's an entrepreneurial ecosystem type of grant. But what we know is that, hey, what I do makes financial sense. It pays for itself. But there's a lot of barriers to it. Energy efficiency retrofits aren't necessarily as sexy as granite countertops or new appliances. You don't get to see the benefits. They don't always turn into higher sale prices, at least as much as you invested, you don't get it all back. So we have to kind of jumpstart a broken market, even though the market should be active. So MASID is going to create an energy internship program, and we're going to target directly displaced coal industry workers. We're working with East Kentucky Concentrated Employment Program to target and find those workers and offer them a 6 to 12-month internship in which they will get paid $20 an hour to learn. They will get full benefits while they are employed. They will get placed with partners that we already engage with, like rural electric co-ops, solar installers, HVAC professionals, and even the How Smart Kentucky program and our E3 program, which is a similar thing for commercial and industrial. So that's not an easy sell. I mean, don't get me wrong. When I was in Montana a couple months ago, the head of the AFL-CIO said, if you're talking about taking me from my $120,000 job at the fuel refinery in Billings and putting me into a $60,000 solar installation job, I'm sorry, but you are my enemy. However, if you have already lost that $120,000 job and you're faced with the opportunity for a $60,000 job, I don't think I will be your enemy if I can help you get that. And so there are things that we're working on right now that can pave the way for that. And it's a huge market for these services that's completely untapped. And it sounds counterintuitive, but bad housing stock is a resource that we can tap now. Because if we pay for no nonsense, no brainer investments in bad housing stock that pays for itself and creates thousands of millions of dollars worth of economic activity, that sounds like a good idea to me. So we have the opportunity to do that now.
Energy efficiency is by far the cheapest way of complying with the Clean Power Plan. It's low-hanging fruit. And Chris's organization and others that are working in this area are doing great work, and I think putting a lot of people to work.
And I would just add that I was just reading an article a couple of days ago that detailed the #1 employers in East Kentucky are government, education, and healthcare. And so those are, at least as far as the employment sector goes in East Kentucky, those are the top 3. Some of the investments in developing strong local economies in East Kentucky have focused on things like sustainable agriculture, heritage tourism, as Chris has mentioned, like renewable energy and energy efficiency development. And I know that there are some plans that have come out of different organizational meetings and initiatives that are really focused quite a bit on bolstering not just the economy but also the culture of Eastern Kentucky. And I think it's really important to make sure that when we talk about jobs, not just in Eastern Kentucky, but we talk about jobs creation in any part of Kentucky, here in Central Kentucky, Western Kentucky, Northern Kentucky, wherever, that we are not just talking about, that we're talking about meaningful job creation, that we're talking about opportunities that allow people to find a vocation, to find a path in life that's really meaningful to them, and that's even harder. but it's worth it. It's worth it to try to figure that out, because that's what keeps a culture resilient, and it's what keeps people on the land and taking care of it, and in their communities and taking care of those communities.
Linda?
You mentioned education. I'm an educator, so I tend to kind of hone in on that. But one of the things I was sitting here thinking about a Danville City Commission meeting that we attended not long ago, and they were talking about what to do with the houses that were falling apart, literally. And they didn't want to tear them down, which I found very refreshing. That several of the commissioners have said the last thing we want to do is talk about tearing these houses down. So I think a lot of what needs to be done is raising awareness so that when that conversation takes place within that community and they're talking about not tearing down those houses, you can talk about, well, what could we turn those houses into? What could we do to make those houses more energy efficient? And if we are going to indeed go in and have somebody come in and do something with those houses, I think going out into the communities and maybe having the people from Eastern Kentucky who successfully retrofit those houses go to other communities within the state and talk about what they've done so that you get some synergy going between the various communities. And I think probably listening to the people that have already done it, they're much more likely than if I went up there and said, well, this is what they did in Eastern Kentucky, and it was a really good idea. Well, I didn't do it, and it didn't work for me. So I think those kinds of conversations, probably sometime in the future, maybe sooner than you might think. Berea would be another good example of getting the folks from Berea to come out and talk to people in Danville about what they are in Casey County, about what they, or any of the other counties, for that matter, talking about what they need to do.
Excellent.
Great point.
The Berea project, was that a co-op? Did they form their own cooperative of some sort? What was the structure of their allowed investment by individual citizens to develop that field?
Berea is served by a municipal electric utility, and a municipality in your hometown is a huge resource. The folks in Boulder have voted recently to spend billions of dollars to create that opportunity for themselves. They want to municipalize their investor-owned utility, Xcel Energy, because they realized that they can do better for themselves than Xcel was willing to do for them. And so any community in Kentucky that is served by a municipal electric utility has a huge opportunity because they're not in it for the profits and they're in it for their constituents. And so it's much more likely that they're going to be willing and able to make investments on behalf of their constituents and to create capacity right there in their town rather than be buying it from Kentucky Utilities or another wholesale energy supplier. And wholesale energy is really expensive when it gets really hot and really cold, when you get peak demand. And so the same things that make my on-bill financing program work for an electric co-op also make it work for a municipality.
So they are very similar to the co-op
Yeah.
kind of a platform.
Yeah, because they're really focused on their constituents, even though they're not owners. They're still the people that they have to live with and see every day in town, and they're subject to the power of those people through the city council. In fact, Glasgow's electric plant board almost got unseated en masse a month ago because they created a new rate structure. They almost lost their jobs, the whole entire plant board, because the 1,200 people in Glasgow got really angry. I think what Glasgow is trying to do has a lot of good points, but the simple lesson from that is they are subject to their constituents, and now they're responding. They have to.
Well, any municipal utility, whether it be a water board, I know Bardstown has their own cable electric. I don't think they have their phone, but a lot of little towns in Kentucky have their own telephone service. You know, they've had since telephones came into the community.
Yep.
They've still been able to kind of keep those autonomous and separate from Mobile or AT&T or whoever. They probably have to work in unison with all the connectivity they have, but there's still a lot of independence there. You mentioned the Rocky Mountain Initiative, that they developed a plan that actually could be, what you said, for all of the country, but the small reliance on natural gas, you said, was part of their platform or their plan. What was the broad base of the energy that they had proposed? And was it all renewable solar, wind?
Yeah, so it's a very comprehensive plan that varies state by state. The nonprofit that created it is called the Rocky Mountain Institute. The plan itself is called Reinventing Fire. and it's mainly distributed energy resources, most of them renewables. But in order to do that, you have to kind of recreate the infrastructure. You have to have more connectivity. You have to have more opportunity to sell across different regions. You have to have more storage. So what they're proposing is like an internet of electricity in which all of these regional electricity markets are more interconnected, and that anyone could have the opportunity to be an energy entrepreneur. So for instance, in Kentucky, you cannot put solar panels on your barn and sell that back onto the grid at retail prices. All you can get is solar wholesale prices. And so, but in Germany, you can own storage, you can own production, and you can jump into the market as an entrepreneur. In New York State, they have banned ownership of renewables by investor-owned utilities. They're opening that market up to individuals and small companies. And so there's a lot of opportunity there. We are in a good position where we can kind of let New York figure it out, California figure it out, and we can adopt those things that have been proven, let them be the bleeding edge and we'll be the leading edge, and just learn some of those things that are working. So we have to get out of our silos and learn about best practices across the country. You know, I've got an example myself. I just recreated a rate structure for Housemarque Kentucky that I could have just called down to Arkansas and they could have handed it to me, but I didn't know about that. And so we have to do better about communicating those ideas that are already happening.
So the deregulation and the increased competition is, you're going to say, equalize or level the marketplace some? You think that's part of FERC? And I mean, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, do they have a role to play in allowing that, or to accommodate that, or to encourage that, or to, I mean, I know that, you know, there's never been a comprehensive federal energy plan.
Wouldn't that be nice?
On behalf of the federal government, that's, you know, taking into consideration all the available resources and how to best, you know, we have a lot of coal, but, you know, coal's not the answer, but it's not all completely evil. It has been a reliable source, and looking at fracking and natural gas, and looking at solar and wind, and, you know, the available total points and how to integrate all those in, like you say, best practices. Where is the federal government making any attempt at all to put together a plan to benefit all?
Yeah, I think so. Regulations, the regulatory environment is critical. In Kentucky, we have a cap on net metering, so I can put solar on my house enough to offset my entire energy footprint, but my school can't, and my church can't, because the 30 kWs is not enough for them. Why in the world should we not be able to empower schools who can look at an investment over decades to go green and clean and save the taxpayers in that county tons of money? So regulations are important. The FERC, I don't know a ton about how many levers that they can use, but I do know that the federal government is dying to loan money to programs like Housemarque Kentucky. They have a program called the Energy Efficiency Conservation Loan Program that loans money directly to rural utilities through the Rural Utility Service, which is a part of the USDA. That's how these rural electric co-ops got built and financed in the first place. So they're willing to make the investments on our behalf. And utilities could create the capacity they want at my house and let me pay for it happily. That's a pretty good deal. So we have to prove those things out. You know, we're trying to prove those things right now because the utilities are conservative. And they have to be conservative, and they should be commended for being conservative. And they shouldn't invest in us until we can prove that we're going to give them a good return on their investment. That's what we're in the process of doing.
in a way, the
We're
Clean
just
Power
about out of
Plan.
time here. We're just about out of time, but I'd like to ask someone from the community who's recently built a solar-powered home, and I wondered if you would comment on that, Chris, what your experience is with having your own solar-powered home?
Yeah, it was very easy. Actually, I don't think everything is so complicated in this big country. I'm from Denmark, and I've been here 20 years, and I like to compare. That happens naturally. One of the things we fight in Europe is bureaucracy and too many regulations. It's not always that regulations over there because we are long-term thinking, but just because we also have different political opinions, a lot of protections. Here I think that we of course lack regulations in a situation like this because we do have to think long-term, and regulations here would help individual people to feel a little more convinced, a little more motivated to try some of these different opportunities we have. For me, it was very easy to think that Kentucky, to me, is a no-brainer. Kentucky is full of sun, and other states in America is great for wind and windmills naturally. But here, I would feel horrible and wouldn't be able to sleep at night if I had not just said, of course, I'm going to use solar power for this house I have built. Actually, it was all pretty easy. There, I think it was great. There were not too many regulations. It was not too complicated. It was easy to have the local vet say, okay, he had used a certain company out of Louisville and he thought they were good, so I contacted Sam Avery, it is. They just asked me what I thought in square feet and how I thought my energy needs were based on an old house I lived in. It was the estimate didn't at all hold in the sense that my house is very effective. So my I was suggested to build a solar base of something like 2,500 kilowatt hours per month. And the house I used to live in, we used about 3,500, but that was log cabins from 1790, when there's not so much insulation. And I was, I'm an engineer, so I built a house that was very insulated, and I didn't want to build a zero house, or just make use of common sense, got good materials. So this house is about 3,500 square feet. My needs or my use so far, this is really what I want to talk about, is it's just been about 300 to 400 kilowatt hours per month.
Wow.
So the Salt River is, they have kindly accepted they have to take all my surplus production. They get that. There are 2 meters, as you know, a net meter and a meter which is applies to what I buy from them. So I send all my energy, all my electricity to them, and it's measured, and they bring me back what I use. And so every month they owe me $200, but I can't get them. But of course it all accumulates. So I would say that as an individual in this country, if you dare to go out and do things like that, it's actually very simple. What was lacking is the information on what a house like mine would need. It would have been better if I had maybe waited and lived there, but of course I would have to have some need of electric resource. The company who advised, they said, of course, that well, I should say there that one of the reasons that I just went ahead fast too was because the federal tax cut run out the end of this year, so I didn't really have that much of a choice. But still, it's not I think it depends how we look at investments. I thought that electricity costs would rise over the next 10 years, so I put that into my calculation, and I had thought I would use more, and I hope that I will use more during the winter. But otherwise, I just have to buy an electric car, and then I can use the solar.
My friend just put in a solar installation recently and said, we're producing so much electricity, it's like we're going to have to get an electric car because we can't benefit from this.
It's a good problem to have.
Yeah.
But so in my situation, really what did that the break-even sort of is further away is because I use less. It's not so. That was a whole, that was a surprise. So all that would not have happened if we had known more. There was nobody who would tell me if you insulate so and so what you would use. I'm sure somebody could have said that, but if the company who sold the solar had that kind of knowledge, that would be great. But so I think that if we are private people, it's not complicated to go out and take some initiatives on your own, and it's very easy to install solar panels at different levels, and even you have a house, you can still do it there. There are better technical people available, I believe, the last few years in this state. Also, I just want to say that when I started, my house was started using solar in March of this year. Ohio had some, and I don't really know enough about it because I haven't spent the time to go into it, but I was told they have had smart politicians who have wanted to use incentives for the Ohioan people, but also neighboring states, so that we would get a certain payback, solar renewable credits payback. But that fell out, I understand. So I don't receive anything on that account at the moment. But I'm very happy, even I over invested sort of, but I don't really feel that. I feel good about what I have.
Very good. Thank you, Chris. Well, anyone who would like to stay a little while after is more than willing to talk with the panelists, with one another, but I think we promised to finish in a timely fashion, so we probably ought to officially close this session. But we cannot thank the three of you enough, Chris Woolery, Leah Baynes, Jim Porter, for the wonderful expertise and experience that you brought to share with us tonight. You certainly have opened up possibilities in my mind that I had not even considered before. I suspect that's true for everyone sitting around this table tonight. So thank you, panelists. Thank you, all of you who came as participants. And thanks to our TV audience and to Gary White, who is our faithful reporter, who makes this kind of very valuable information available to our entire Tri-County community. So thank you one and all. Have a great night. And may we look forward to some cool weather so we don't have to continue to be terrified of the effects of climate change. It's nice to have warm days, but...